So in this tutorial slash assignment, we're going to be practicing how to create three-dimensional geometry. Um, Now, I should note that there's actually in Rhino, and this is true for a lot of softwares, there's a lot of different ways, different commands to create the same object or the same thing we're trying to create. Um, and the same is true in Rhino, right? What I want to do though in this tutorial, since it is kind of a foundational course, is just teach you the very kind of or the most common way of creating geometry. Okay. But I do want to make kind of a note that there are other ways of creating surfaces, creating three-dimensional geometry that I'm not going to be covering. I really want to hone in on just kind of getting the basics out there and you practicing kind of the fundamentals. But again, once you feel more comfortable and confident, and this comes down the line with more practice, just remember that there are other ways of creating geometry, and sometimes those other ways are going to work better for you depending on what it is that you're trying to create. And we'll cover some of that stuff as well as we're um, modeling and learning throughout the course, but I do just want to make that stipulation at the very beginning. Okay. Now, I'm going to be creating four objects. I'm going to be modeling with you these four different objects. And the assignment is to actually kind of recreate the first three objects. And then the fourth object is a object entirely of your own choice. So you're going to design that fourth object, but we'll cover that fourth one when we get there. But the first three objects is something that you're going to have to recreate kind of exactly the way that I'm doing it. So it's up to you whether or not you want to just watch through the entire tutorial, or if you want to watch, pause as you're modeling it at home. Okay. So here we have our Rhino file open. As always, whenever we start a new file, we're going to go type in units. We're going to set the units to feet, and we're going to set the distance display to feet and inches. I'll go ahead and hit OK. And I also recommend that you save your file as well. So go File, Save As, and then save it to the location you want to save it to, so that if anything, worst case scenario, your computer crashes, you still have a backup file of what it is that you're creating. Okay. Okay. A lot of the work we're going to be doing with these massing is going to be utilizing the top and the front view. But right now, what I want to do is move my cursor right here to the center, and you get that kind of four directional arrow marker. So I'm going to click and bring this down, and that's going to make our window, our perspective window and our top window much larger because that's going to be kind of the focal point for us right now. Okay. Now, I've mentioned in previous lectures why it's important to model in both the top, front, and right, and not so much in the perspective, especially getting started. Um, just because the perspective is a bit misleading when we don't really have any geometry there. You'll also notice that on my layers, I'm sticking to the default layer for this assignment. It's fine to just leave everything on the default layer. Okay. So I'm going to start off by creating a rectangle. I'm going to use the rectangle tool. So I'll go ahead and click here, and I'm actually going to create the rectangle in the top view. So I'll click anywhere in the positive quadrant, so anywhere in this section of the green and red axes. And I'm going to click once, move my cursor, and I'm going to go out 10 feet, enter, and then move my cursor up, and I'm going to go up by 15 feet, enter. Okay. Now we've covered the extrude curve command in the past, but this is when we're going to use it. Now we've covered the whole poly surface versus extrusion versus surface. Again, whenever we create geometry, we want poly surface. So I'm going to, we want a poly surface. And the way we create a poly surface, the most common way is using the extrude curve command. So I'm going to click on the curve, okay? And really quickly in Rhino, lines and curves are kind of interchangeable words, okay? The reason why it's not lines is if you notice that a lot of what we do, like these are curved lines and these are polylines, but we use the two interchangeably. So I'm going to select on the rectangle. I'm going to type in extrude curve, and I'm going to move the cursor up. Okay, now at this point, if you followed the previous assignments and done the previous assignments, your solid option up here should already be set to yes. So you shouldn't have to do anything. But if it's not, and it's set to solid equals no, then you're going to click on it, okay? And it should toggle to yes. If you're on a Mac, again, it should be on the left-hand side. If you don't see it, it's because you need to pull down the little toolbar or the little bar, kind of this line, right? But this line will be farther up. Bring that down or use the scroll bar on the right-hand side until you see the solid box, and then you're going to want to check that on, okay? It's important that this is set to solid equals yes, because this is what's going to convert it as a poly surface. So now I'm going to go ahead and bring this up 10 feet, enter, okay? Now I'm in the wireframe mode, so let's go ahead and change that to shaded. And this is what you should see, okay? Really quickly, just as a refresher, I'm going to go ahead and copy this curve. If for whatever reason you extrude curve, and this is set to no, and we go up 10 feet, right? If for whatever reason this is what your box looks like without a top or a bottom surface, then the way we fix that is we select it and then we type in the command cap, okay? And then that'll convert it into a poly surface. But that also tells you that you did not change your settings to solid equals yes when we do that extrude curve, right? So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Let's go back to this right here. So now we have a cubed poly surface. I'm going to go ahead and create another one. Okay. Let's go and create another rectangle. But this one, I'm going to want it at the midpoint. Okay. Essentially, the goal here is going to be to create two intersecting cubes. Okay. So if I come here, and this is why it's so important to have both the top and the perspective mode. If I want to draw a rectangle that starts at the midpoint of this rectangle here, specifically of this segment of the rectangle, and I'm in the top view and I move my cursor and I get to the mid. Now, in order to have this, again, you need to have your object snaps, your O snaps in the mid turned on and down here as well. If I move my cursor here, it looks like it's in the middle of the rectangle, but if you look at my perspective view, you'll notice that it's at the top when in fact I would want it at the bottom, okay? And so if I want to draw something and I want it to be at the midpoint, but I want it on a different surface, then we move our cursor into the perspective mode, okay? And really quickly, as I'm doing this, I want you to just take a look at the top right corner where it says top in perspective, and notice how that changes color based on where my cursor is. So that means that the view is active wherever my cursor is placed. So once I'm still in the rectangle tool, if I click on this midpoint down at the bottom, so I'll click here, okay? But I'm going to come back to the top view, right? And now I'll go ahead and specify the dimension, so 10 feet, enter. I'm going to go up 15 feet, enter. Okay, and now I have a rectangle that's at the middle of this cube that I've created, but on the bottom plane. So now I'll go ahead and select this rectangle. I'll use the extrude curve command. Oops, if I could type it correctly. Extrude curve. Again, solid should be equal to yes. And again, once you make this setting change, it should default to solid equals yes from now on until you go back and you change it. So we'll go up 10 feet, enter. Okay. All right. Now the next thing, so we have two identical cubes. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to want to do is move this up. Now I'm going to use the move tool. Now we've talked about the gumball and we could click on the arrow and I can move it up a specific dimension. But I want you to begin to practice using the move command as well, because we actually end up using the move tool more than we actually do the gumball. Because the gumball, you need a specific dimension or distance, But oftentimes we can't calculate that distance at the top of our head if we're trying to move something to line up with a certain thing in a building. So we always have to find reference points. So, and to do that, we need the move tool. So I'm going to use the move tool. I'm going to type in move. I'm going to do is MO, enter. I'll go ahead and select what I want to move, enter, or spacebar. Okay. And again, I've mentioned this in the past, but just to refresh, the move tool is kind of a two-part command. You first have to select where you want to move from, kind of where am I grabbing it, and where is it going to touch. Okay. We can obviously just grab it at random and just move it, but then you find yourself trying to eyeball its location, which we never want to do. Okay. So we always want to be very specific using our object snaps. I'm going to grab it from the midpoint, and I'm going to move it up and grab it to that point. And you'll see here where it says end perp int. That means that this is the end point. It's also the perpendicular point, and it's also an intersection point. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click right there. And then I'll go ahead and select this object again, and I'm going to want to move it inward. So I'll use the move command. And I'll go ahead and grab it. At this point, I can grab it at any endpoint. And I'm going to want to come over here. Oh, notice that I want to go straight. But I need orthographics turned on. So I'll go ahead and click on ortho. Or if you remember, we could use the shift key. Hold down, press down on the shift command as well. But I'm going to turn ortho on. We'll go this way and type in 5 feet, enter. And then click. Okay. And now we have these two intersecting cubes. I'm going to go ahead and take the line work from that original rectangle and delete it. I don't want to see it anymore. Okay, so now I have two poly surfaces. The last thing is to Boolean union them. Okay. Now we did cover Boolean union in one of the previous lectures. The Boolean union is will make surfaces or extruded surfaces into poly surfaces. And again, a poly surface is a solid object. And so here what we have are two solid objects. But when we Boolean union them, it's going to turn these two solid objects and it's going to merge them into one. So it's essentially going to kind of weld it together, which is what we want. At the end of the day, whenever we finish our models, we want all of our objects to be kind of polysurfaced, Boolean unioned together as a solid object. So I'm going to hold down the shift key to select both of my cubes. And this icon right here is the Boolean union. And you'll notice that when I move my cursor, it says Boolean union. So I'll go ahead and left click. And there, even in the indentation, you could see, right, how the line work itself changed. And now this entire object is one single object. It's no longer two individual cubes. It merged it as one, right? And so this is the first massing that you're going to have to create. Okay? I'm going to move on to another massing. And this one, I'm going to give it a little space. Okay. And we're going to come over here, do the same thing. For this one, we're going to start off fairly similar to the first one. We're going to use the rectangle tool. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of click anywhere here at random, just giving a little space from the previous massing. This time, instead of going 10 feet by 15, we're going to go 15 feet by 10. So let's go 15 feet, enter, move the cursor up, and then 10 feet, enter. Okay. And then I'm going to extrude this up using the extrude curve command. Extrude curve. Solid is set to yes. We're going to go up 15 feet. Okay. So we covered the Boolean union. Actually, no, let's go ahead and leave it. Sorry. what I want to do now is actually use the planar tool. So let's, if I want to, so I want to add to this cube that I've created. Okay. So in this case, I would go ahead and use the polyline. But I want to draw on the actual kind of surface, right? I want to draw something that is going to be aligned to this surface here. Okay? But notice that in my perspective mode, um, I'm kind of hovering over this surface here, but take a look at my top view. I am nowhere near that surface, right? So this is a situation where we are going to want planar turned on. Okay. Now, I covered planar in the past, but just as a refresher, we'll go ahead and click on planar. Now we're actually going to use it. So planar works by drawing along a plane that we select. And we first select the plane based on where we click with our cursor. Okay, so your first click whenever you use the planar option here is really important because that's what's going to set, it's going to set the plane for you. Okay. And actually what I want to do as well is just move my cursor and bring this back up because I'm actually going to want to see along my front view. Okay. Notice as long as I'm not clicking on anything, so I'm not left clicking and I'm just using the wheel, I did have to click on this arrow, but other than that, I'm actually still in the planar, the polyline command. Okay. So again, the front view is along the red axis. So what I'm going to do is come over here. I'm going to click in the perspective mode right at this top left corner of the box, and then come over here to the front view. So by clicking from the perspective view over here and then jumping over to the front view, I'm now telling Rhino that I want to set the plane starting along this point here. And since I'm drawing on the front view, it's going to give me the plane along the red axis, which is right over here. Okay? So now in here, I'm going to come out 25 feet. Enter. Click. I'm going to go up 9 feet. Enter. I'm going to come out this way 10 feet. Click. And then end it over here. Now, when we end, especially when we're using the planar tool, you always want to keep an eye in the perspective just to make sure that you are actually ending where you want it to end and not accidentally ending somewhere back here, right? Now, the reason why I say you have to be careful is because the planar tool will draw along a plane, but your object snaps will override the plane. So if for whatever reason I come over here and my cursor accidentally grabs a different endpoint because I have something in front or just grab something farther back, regardless or even though I'm in the planar tool, it's actually going to jump to that endpoint. Okay, so that's why when we come over here, you just want to take a look at your perspective mode, make sure you're ending in the correct location. Okay, so there we have that. So now we use the planar tool. Come over here, and again, use the extrude curve command. Solid is set to yes, and I'm going to bring this back 5 feet. Now what I want to do, since I have this here, is I actually want to move it and center it to the middle of this box. So I'll go ahead and select this, use the move command, hit enter, and I'm going to grab the midpoint, grab this object, I have it selected, grab it from the midpoint, so I'm going to click, and then move my cursor over until I see the midpoint of my actual box, which is right there. Okay. I should note that when we extrude curve, right, and we create the massing, it generates the massing on its own as a separate thing. It'll always still leave the curvature, right? So when we go extrude curve, it'll delete. I'm sorry, it doesn't delete the original curve. We can change that right over here, which says delete input. We can change that to say yes, right? But I rarely will ever delete the input. I actually prefer to leave it, make sure it's set, make sure it is what I want before I go in and I'll delete it manually. The reason for that is if I extrude curve and I delete the input, and then it turns out I don't like it, then I'm going to have to go back and redraw the curve all over again. So it's an additional step. So it's a lot easier to just do the command, make sure that you got what you need, and then come back to the curve once you're set that you're not going to need it anymore, and then delete it. Okay. So that's it. That's all we're covering for this second object. We're going to go ahead now and move on to the third one. And this one's going to be a little bit more complicated because we're going to start to introduce the Boolean difference command. Okay. Oops, sorry. One last thing. Forgot. We need to union these together so that they're not two separate objects. So we're going to Boolean union that right there. Okay. You know that it's a successful Boolean union when you click on just one surface and everything gets selected. Okay. Okay. So now with this third object, we're going to do the same thing. Give it a little space. We're going to start off with a rectangle. And I'm going to, let's come over here. So I'm going to start just at any corner. Notice also that when I'm using the rectangle, I want to move the cursor in the direction I want the rectangle to be in. So here I'm going to just create a 15 by 15 by 15 cube. So I'll go 15 feet, enter, and I'll go 15 feet, enter, and then I'm going to extrude this up by 15 feet, enter. Okay, and now I have a cube. So what I want to do, right, up until now, we've been talking about the Boolean union. This is what we call kind of additive modeling. It's an additive process, meaning I create something, then I create it, and I add it to its original, right? And we are building a massing, we're building a form by continuing to add different blocks, different forms to the original massing. And so that in that sense, it's an additive process, okay? However, there are times where we can actually go the opposite direction. And instead of doing an additive process, we use Boolean difference to do a subtractive process. Okay? And so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to start to chip away at this block. And it's going to be a very similar process. Okay? We're going to use, what I'm going to start off by doing is trying to kind of chamfer, essentially cut the corner of this cube. I'm going to draw the line or draw the shape that I want to subtract. Okay. So I'm going to come over here. I'll go ahead and left click to create the polyline. And I'm actually going to go to the midpoint. Now I actually am on planar. I can do this over here with planar on, okay? But I just finished mentioning that our object snaps override planar. And what I have in mind is only using object snaps. So I could actually do this just in the perspective mode. So I am in the line, I'll go from midpoint, then I'm going to go down to this midpoint, and then I'll go up to the end point, and then close it off again. Okay? And now I have a set of joined lines. Remember that in order to do any extrude curve, all of the lines need to be joined, okay? And in other words, I could not have just used a line segment, for example, and drawn one line here, and then gone back and drawn another line here, and gone back and drawn another line there. Because although I do have all of the lines themselves are not joined, right? So I'll go ahead and delete this actually. We need all of the lines joined together like that. Okay, and then we can go ahead and extrude that curve. So now that I have this triangle, I'm going to use the extrude curve command. Okay. And since I'm going to be subtracting this kind of triangle from the block, I want to make sure that I go past the surface. Okay, so I'm going to go out over here. Now it doesn't really matter how far. I just want to make sure I go past this back-end surface. Because here's a complicated thing. And sometimes it'll work and sometimes it doesn't, depending on, I don't know, how Rhino feels. I'm about to actually, let's go ahead and complete the Boolean difference before I start going into some of the more technical stuff. So I just extruded this past my block. And now we'll go ahead and use the Boolean difference to subtract it from this block. So I'm going to click on this little triangle pull out. And the first one is the Boolean union, but the second one is Boolean difference. So I'll go ahead and click on Boolean difference and then see what it's asking me. So it says select surfaces or poly surfaces to subtract from. So we want to subtract from this one. And then it says press enter to continue. So I'll hit press enter. Now select surfaces or poly surfaces to subtract with. So I want to select this one right there and then hit enter when done. And there we have the Boolean difference. So we subtracted that one shape. Notice that my original shape did disappear. It got deleted, so that's why it doesn't matter that I went past this surface. Okay. And also notice that this surface also got deleted. And this is where the complication will sometimes happen, right? Most often than not, this is what happens. It gets deleted from the object that you want to delete from. On occasion, I'm going to undo this so we could bring back our triangle. Occasionally, these two surfaces, right, from the triangle and from the block, these two surfaces are actually touching one another. They're along the same surface because they're aligned. And so when you have two overlapping surfaces along the same plane and you use the Boolean difference, sometimes the surface from the cube, from the thing you want to delete, overrides the thing you want to delete with. So we would essentially have, I'm going to try to just to give you an idea what that would look like. I'm going to move this like a hair, like 1/32 of an inch. And then I'm going to do the Boolean difference. Occasionally, if those two objects are aligned and they're overlapping surfaces, this is what you'll end up having is the surface from the original object did not get deleted, but everything else did. And that's because you have these two overlapping surfaces, right? So the general rule of thumb, right, or what you typically want to do whenever you use the Boolean difference, that's why it's important to go past the surface. But I will actually always bring this back just a little bit, just to make sure that it goes through on both ends. Okay, and that's going to ensure that you are actually deleting it from both, or that you don't run into that issue of those overlapping surfaces and then Rhino selecting the wrong surface to keep. So again, Boolean difference, click, press enter, click. I'm also hitting the space bar, so it's enter or the space bar. And there we go. Okay. Now I can go ahead and delete that curve. All right. Now from here, I'm going to add another rectangle on top. And this time I am going to use the planar. So I'll go ahead and click on the polyline, select planar, click right here on this endpoint, and move my cursor this way. And I'm going to go out 20 feet, enter. And now I'm going to go up 10 feet, click. And then I'll go out, come back another 20 feet, and then come straight down. And before I do that, just make sure that I'm in the right location. I'll even sometimes close the object or the curve in the perspective mode. Okay. And then I'll go ahead and extrude this another 15 feet. Okay. So this is the object that we get. But now I want to use the Boolean difference again. And I just want to kind of fill it. I want to curve this top part. Okay. To do that, we can try to think like, we can use the fillet tool. but I actually want to use the curve, sorry, the arc command. Okay. Now, I mentioned in the previous tutorial that using the arc command, or most of these, have different kind of settings, right? What happened here? So by default, right, the one that we click is center start angle, right? But the different options are really kind of based on the information that you have available to you. That's why it's important to use and to look at what are the different ways to create an arc. Because here it's saying that my first click is the center of the object, then followed by the start of the object, and then the angle. So again, click, then start, then the actual angle that I want. You turn ortho off. All right. But again, for this, in order for this to happen, I need to know the center point. If I try to do that here, right, because I want to curve this, create a curve right here, or an arc right here, I need to know the center point, which I don't have, right? And so that's why this arc tool does not work for us. So if I come over here to this next one, it's saying we can click on the start, then the end, and then the point on the arc, which I don't have the arc that it created, so this one doesn't work for me. This one over here is the start, then the end, then the direction at the start. This one seems a bit more promising. Now, I will say that with all of these drawing commands, some of these aren't clear, so it's kind of a trial and error. You have to click on it and see what that does, and then say, yes, that works, or no, that doesn't work, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click on this one. And the first one is the start of the arc, so I'm going to start at the midpoint. Then it's the end of the arc, so I'm going to start at end at this midpoint. And then I'm going to move my cursor up, right? And I can do that over here as well. Notice that when I move this up, that curve changes based on the height. Luckily, what I want to do is move it to this endpoint right there. Okay? And now I have a curve that starts and ends at the midpoint, right? And it kind of curves based on the height of the box. Great. So now that we have the curve, if we want it, now we want to go ahead and delete, subtract, use Boolean difference for this area here. Okay. Now, although it looks like we're ready to go, we're not, because remember that we need joined lines to create that curve. And right now we only have this. So I'm going to come over here to the polyline, and I'm going to click on the midpoint, come over here, click there, and then come down. And then I'll hit the spacebar to end. So now I have this curve, okay? Notice that I have the other options. I can still select the original curve that I used to create the rectangle, which I actually don't need, so I'll go ahead and delete that. Or I can select on the extrusion. Okay? So we'll go ahead and click here. I'm going to click on this set of lines, and then I'll hold down the Shift key and select on this curve. Okay. Right now, there are two separate lines, but in order to create a poly surface, we need those lines to be joined. So I'm going to type in join. So now when I click on the curve, all of the lines are selected. So from here, we'll go ahead and extrude curve and bring this out. Again, we want to go past that original surface. And just to play it safe, I'm going to go ahead and move this back just like that. So now what I'm going to do is the Boolean difference command again. Come over here, click on Boolean difference. Which one do we want to select, subtract from? So the first one is what are we subtracting from? That's the first click. Then I'll hit the space bar, or you can hit the enter key on the keyboard. And then I'll click on what I'm subtracting with, and then again space bar. And now we've subtracted that. At this point, I can go ahead and delete this line or that set of curves. And we're going to do one more thing here, and we're going to drill a hole right down the middle of this guy. Okay. I'm going to do that using the circle tool. Okay. I still have planar turned on, by the way. Okay. And that's just, again, because I want to make sure that this circle doesn't get drawn at some weird angle, that it's goes along the plane that I'm drawing on. So I'm going to come over here to the midpoint, click, come out. And at this point, I can go ahead and go on the top view just to make sure that it doesn't go to the wrong place. Okay. And I'm going to set the radius to 4 feet. Enter. Now I have this curve. I'm going to extrude curve and bring this straight down. And I'm going to go into the front view here so that I could actually see better. Make sure that it actually goes through, because from this perspective view, it's kind of hard to tell and make sure that I'm going actually through it. So I'll go in the front view. And again, I'm going to drag it quite a bit past where it needs to go. And then I'll click. Come back, select it, and then just click and drag this up just a little bit. Okay. And then I'll go ahead and use the Boolean difference. And it's asking, what do you want to subtract from? Subtract from this and this. Okay. I'll hit the space bar and then select on the cylinder that I've created and then hit the space bar again. And now I'll go ahead and delete that curve because I don't need it anymore. And there we have an object that was created using both additive and subtractive strategies. Okay. And this is going to be your third object. All right. So for the assignment, everyone needs to create these 3 objects exactly the way that I've created them. And hopefully you remember to Boolean union, because I didn't do that, Boolean union all of them together. Okay. As one actual solid object. Now this fourth one, you still have to complete, but I'm going to be less prescriptive about it, and I will let you kind of create your own one. It's going to have to be both an additive and subtractive. It's going to have to be created using both additive and subtractive techniques. And I want you to start playing with the curves. Okay. So I'm going to create a box and we'll go ahead and just make this, let's go with 20 feet by 15 feet. Looks good. And I'm going to extrude this up using extrude curve this up 10 feet, enter. You know what, let's go up a little bit higher. I'm going to undo that. Let's go extrude curve. We'll go up 15 feet. Okay. Then what I want to do is using my curve tools, I'm going to create kind of a curvy side over here. So let's go click on this pull out. Come on, why isn't it working? There we go. I mentioned in the previous tutorial, I actually prefer using the interpolate point curve. So I'll go ahead and click on this one here. Make sure that planar is turned on, okay? Because I want to draw a plane here, and I don't want to accidentally have this curve go to a different point. So I'm going to go ahead and click at the bottom here, then come over here to my top view, and start just drawing a curve. I'm going to want this to come out, and maybe it's going to go all the way around. Now notice, take a look at how it ends. Notice I'm not clicking yet. Take a look over here, my perspective. Over here, I'm hitting the midpoint, which in most cases seems right because I'm hitting an object snap. I'm hitting kind of an actual point on the object. But take a look at my perspective mode. Notice where that cursor is. Let me go ahead and move this around here so we could get a better look. It's a lot higher at that angle. It's jumping up, right? And that I don't want. So the way I would end this is actually coming over here to my perspective mode and actually making sure that I click on the actual surface or the plane that I want to end. So I'll click right there, and then I'll go ahead and hit the Enter key or spacebar on the keyboard. Okay. And so now I have the curve. Now again, we cannot create a surface, or we cannot create an extrusion off this because it is only, oh, well, we do have the original rectangle, which I'll go ahead and delete to make my point. Um, we only have this set of lines, right? Even if I didn't delete the rectangle is its own thing. It's its own set of lines that is separate from this. So we're still going to have to create our own set of lines. So let me go ahead and undo, Control Z. Since I undid that, I now have to go back and delete this curve. So I'll go ahead and create a polyline from this point to this point. I'm going to orbit around just to make sure I click on the correct location to that point. And then I'll hit the space bar. Okay. And now holding down the Shift key, I'm going to select my curve and then my set of lines over here. Go ahead and click on that. And then I'll use the join command to join these two sets of lines, right? So now when I click, this outline also gets selected. Now I'll go ahead and use the extrude curve. Okay. I'm going to bring this up and I'm going to go up 15 feet. Enter. This is kind of too close to this object, so I'm going to select the whole thing and just move it. Okay. So there we have it. We have kind of a, I don't know, a shapy object. Now what I want to do, and you know what, let's go ahead and Boolean union them at this point. So I'll select both of these and I'm going to use the Boolean union. Okay. And now merge it as one actual object. Let's go now over here to the front view. We should actually just take this to shaded view. That might help us. Okay. And the same, sometimes I like top view to be in wireframe, but let's go shaded view. Okay. So now what I want to do is actually use the Boolean difference and cut a piece off of both corners, the top left and the bottom right corner. Okay. The way I'm going to do that is again using my curve tools. Okay. And I have planar on, but this is where it has to be where I have to be very careful. Okay. Because what I want to draw is going to be a shape, and I actually don't want to reference anything on this building, or sorry, anything on this object that I've created, which is different than the way we've done this, right? This one, we actually wanted to reference that one point. This time, I don't want to reference anything in this building. So in this case, just to make sure I don't reference anything, I'm actually going to turn off my object snaps. This way, it doesn't select endpoints, midpoints, perpendicular intersection points, any of these guys over here. And I can very easily and freely just kind of draw a shape and say, you know what, I want to, I don't know. Maybe something like that. Okay. And I'll hit enter to finish that form. Okay. Now, again, it is important that planar is on just so that we make sure that it's actually drawn on the same plane and the squiggly line didn't start going, drawing lines and points back here. At this point, I'll go ahead and turn my object snaps back on. And I want to close this shape off. Okay. And I'll go ahead and create a line there. I'll go ahead and turn ortho off because I want this to be straight. Now, how do I figure out how far to go, right? Now, if you remember one of the earlier tutorials, we talked about Smart Track. So this is a situation where I'm going to want to turn Smart Track on because I want to be able to reference this point here. So now with Smart Track turned on, I'll move my cursor over here and then just move it straight up. And then it snaps right there. Now click, and now I'll go ahead and click that. Okay. And now I should have two kind of sets of lines that are along the same plane. I'll go ahead and select this line, hold down the Shift key and click on this one. And I'll use the join command, type in join. And now when I click on it, all of the lines are selected. And then I'll go ahead and use the extrude curve command. And I'm going to extrude this all the way through. Okay. In this situation, there's no need to move it forward because the front surface is not aligned to the front surface that I'm trying to cut from. So now I'm going to use the Boolean difference, select the object I want to subtract from, hit enter or the space bar, and then select the object that I'm subtracting with. And there we have it. Right? Which is a cool little cutout. I'm going to do that one more time. At this point, I can go ahead and delete this. We'll do that one more time. We'll go a little bit faster this time. Definitely turn off Smart Track, and we're turning off Object Snaps, and we're also turning Ortho off because if I'm drawing a curve down at this bottom corner, I do not want it to be rectilinear, so turning Ortho off. Come over here, and I'm going to use the Interpolate Curve. I do have planar turned on. Okay? And so now let's say we're going to kind of cut this little portion just like that. Hit enter. Now I want to go ahead and close this curve up, and I can't because I don't have object snaps turned on, so I'll click on them on. And I should also turn on Smart Track. Click here, move my cursor there, and then come straight down. There we go. Hit the space bar and now select both sets of lines and join them. Okay. And then from here, we will extrude the curve, go all the way through, and then we'll use the Boolean difference. Select that object, hit the space bar, select this object, hit the space bar. Let's delete this line, and there we have it. Let's go ahead and delete this set of lines as well. Okay. Now you can imagine this as a pretty funky, cool building. Or maybe it's not cool. But nonetheless, we got a pretty interesting form, shape, with just a set of simple commands and simple moves using additive and subtractive techniques. And this is really kind of what makes Rhino great, which would be extremely difficult to model this in, let's say, Revit or SketchUp, and almost impossible to model in AutoCAD, right? So again, for this final piece, you can go ahead and create your own quirky little shape, just as long as you are doing both additive using the Boolean union, as well as the Boolean difference, as well as the curve command. Okay. Hopefully this kind of helps to just figure out and play with creating three-dimensional geometry. Good luck.